Welcome to a Celtic state of mind. It's Sunday, it's the ACSOM Bulletin, and today I'm joined by Tony Haggerty, Russell Boyce, Laura Bradburn. Welcome to the Sunday show. Welcome to the Sunday Club. Russell, how are you doing? I notice it's not an Adidas that you're wearing today, which is a turn up for the books.
Well, it'd be a letdown, Mondays are for me and Kev, but I know Kev's digging me these days. I
have noticed that.
Adidas stuff, so I'm going to keep my Adidas for Mondays, and I thought, just because I don't want people watching today and thinking, is it Monday? Have I missed a day? Should I be at my work right now?
I like that.
If I was going to do this, it would have confused people's heads. It's not
attention to detail, Russell. It's all about attention to detail. And on that note, look at the headline. Tony Haggerty, I'll come to you. You're a man of many, many words. Mass exodus expected. Will there be a redemption? We all know that Robert Nesta Marley was a Celtic man. We know this.
Genius headline. I'll take all the credit for it. Yep. So, because it's the kind of thing I would say as he sits swinging in the chair with his Valdunican cardigan. But there you go. Yeah, a cracking headline like that.
I love the Bob Marley story. I remember the first time I ever heard the fact that he was a Jungle Jim was in Dixie Deans's book.
Yeah.
And Dixie spoke about meeting him backstage in Australia when Dixie was over there at the kind of tail end of his career. And he met him backstage and he was able to recite the Lisbon Lions. And people thought that it was a joke story simply because Dixie had got the photograph with Bob Marley. And then I think a hack actually was interviewing Rowan Marley for something completely different, and he seen an opportunity to ask him about Celtic, and he was like, no, from a young age, my dad taught me all about Celtic. And I was watching, the fairly recent documentary, it might be about 10 years old, the Bob Marley it's fantastic documentary, it's on Netflix and that, and I was watching it, and it was one of the ones where it was just a cutaway, Russell, where they just basically looked through the old photograph album and they used some good photos, and there's Bob Marley with Rita in the back garden, wee Rowan's on his shoulder wearing the hoops. He's wearing the hoops,
Love that.
And I remember tweeting that out and it just went mental, and Rowan Marley came in on the Twitter debate to explain that he was a massive Celtic fan with his old boy, which is just tremendous.
That's class, mate. That is class.
That is class.
And it's also old school to actually recite teams.
It is, isn't it?
Depending on what generation, if you've got granddads or great-granddads, still thoughts it to be, they can recite teams at the drop of a hat. And
they always do it in groups.
Yeah.
Bonner, Morris, Rogan, Aiken and McCarthy.
Yeah.
And then they go into the midfield.
Yes. And they can give you formations and talk about left halves and inside rights and...
Oh, the old-fashioned ones.
Do you know why that is, Tony? That is because they watch teams where they actually selected a consistent 11. Like, who's going to be able to name an 11 from this season?
Correct.
Can't even get a goalkeeper right.
I'm going to give you a couple of 11s that might make you fall off your seat in a second, Laura. But I mean, what would you deal with? What would your old man and your granddad, Tony, how would they deal with the catholification of football? The data analysis. All these terms under the data analysis that I don't even understand.
If I...
The Red Hot Chili Peppers sang
Catholification, yeah. It's in your head now. Dream of Catholification.
The laptop generation.
Nobody speaks like that about football, do they? Apart from, the niche laptop. I mean, I think that's the collective term, isn't it? A Catholification of laptops.
Aye.
That's the collective term in usage, I believe, or it certainly is now.
The collection of laptops. The big thing about it, I remember that day, Tony, that we were invited into the Celtic press conference and someone asked David Turnbull about XG rates. There was a few moments of silence and then he just fessed up and says, what are you talking about? So on the one hand, people are saying it's obvious that we don't concentrate on data analysis. But then on the other hand, when you actually speak to footballers and managers, they say, the less information, the better. When it comes down to actually the game plan, make sure they know what they're doing and don't overload them with XG rates. It's the catholification of football.
My father had an expression, don't pour 4-gallon and 2-gallon heads.
There you go.
Yeah, I agree. I still think you need that on your conscience when, you're playing football. It's meant to be an off-the-cuff thing. The moments of inspiration you've ever seen in football from Celtic, especially over the years, has been moments of magic. not moments of taking all that nonsense into consideration. It's been off the cuff, inspiration. And full account, Arsenal didn't need to think about XG rates. They just did it.
Well,
They didn't need to worry about 14 clean sheets or something from Brad Friedel in a season. You know what I mean? He just uses outside his boot and thinks over his head in front of the away end because he doesn't worry about all that nonsense. You know what I mean? And that's how it should still be.
Yeah, I think there's a middle ground there. Like, I think if you watch some of the best coaches, like in the NFL and some of the top football coaches, I think there's a place for that for them, for putting the plan together. Where there doesn't need to be that passing on of that information is to the players. That's part of a manager's job, is to take all that information, take those stats, take those things that you put together, and then communicate it to the players to a way that's simple enough for them to be able to action it out on a football pitch. So I think there's a middle ground there somewhere, but certainly I wouldn't be expecting a player to know in depth about it when you're talking about it.
It's very niche, Laura. Let's be honest. It's a niche thing. Some people are their flick is switched by their switch is flicked by stats and stuff. But I'm with Eb Skovdahl on statistics. Former Aberdeen manager, sadly no longer with us, who said statistics. What was it? He said statistics are like miniskirts. They give you good ideas, but they cover up the best things.
Wow.
That was a real quote that wasn't lost in translation.
They cover up the
very 2021, mate.
When was he the Aberdeen manager? That was only about 20 years ago, wasn't it?
In the 90s.
Yes. It was in the John Barnes era.
They cover up the most important things or something, he said. The statistics are like miniskirts. They cover up the most important.
We're getting a few laughs.
Good ideas,
We're getting a few laughs.
They cover up the most important things. But that's just... And you kind of think, yep, it's very niche. People who like stuff like that will like it and will quote it and they'll produce it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying there's not a place for it, but I think when you're talking to footballers, you have to be wary of putting a big burden on them and making it a more pressurised game. Russell says, well, a lot of footballers just want to entertain, and that entertainers are off the cuff. Lots of maverick football players have played for Celtic, and you try to impart that information to them. I don't think they would have performed.
Tony, do you almost think it's insulting? Do you almost think it's insulting to some of the players that have got literally the gift? They've got the gift. They know how to play football. It's never been stats that drove them. It's just been the God gift they were given and how they've delivered it. Do you almost think when someone's telling you stuff like that, they find it insulting?
Well, can you imagine trying to tell something like that to Henrik Larsson, as you said? Henrik Larsson's no thinking, as you say, Brad Friedel's 14 clean sheets as he's sliding towards him. He's just doing what comes natural to him, off the cuff footballer. So, yeah.
The way I ask, what I try to do, Russell, if I ever speak to anybody in the game, at any level of the game, I do try and ask them the questions very much like that. How does this actually work? Can you overload footballers with too much data, etc.? And I was speaking to Pat Nevin last week. I mentioned that before. And Pat still does a bit of work down at Chelsea, etc. And he was talking about the fact that you get this manager, often called an elite manager, with all the staff round about them. And we'll get on to Eddie Howe's staff in a minute. But the key, he says, is for the manager to have almost like a filter. So he's got all this different information coming in, be that the figures of a player's performance or their diet or their training regime. They bring it all in. And of course, you've also got the opposition analysis as well.
Sure.
But brings it all into the manager, and he says the key thing for the manager is to ensure that the information that he filters down to his players doesn't create any kind of confliction of what am I doing, as in what Callum McGregor said a couple of times this season. We didn't actually know what we were meant to be doing today. So I think it's a fine balance, but it is modern football, and we'll continue to use that term that Tony and I came up with the other day.
You're talking about a manager breaking it down and breaking it to players in layman terms.
Absolutely.
Not like Pythagoras' theorem.
No, but that's exactly what I was talking about. I think that is the role of a manager. Like, the physio is not going to tell the player exactly how he's torn the muscle and what the muscle is and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean there's not a place for that knowledge. It's about giving the relevant knowledge to the relevant person. Yeah. The physio doesn't need to know about XG. The player doesn't need to know about muscular stuff. the dietitian doesn't need to know about the tactics on the day of the game. It's about filtering the right information out to the right staff members, and then the manager's role is to bring it all together and put it to the players in a way that they can deliver what they need to deliver on the pitch on the day, and that's it.
And,
No, I think that's fair because
in layman terms, that's what it is. I mean, just tell me it so I can understand. That's all it is, isn't it, really?
I think it's important what Laura's saying though there. I think it's the way the manager then, sort of delegates that information, because at the end of the day, you look at a Moussa Dembele, we were fortunate enough to have for 2 years now. Tony was talking about it on Friday, he gets it. That's a brilliant aspect of the fact he was Celtic. But the flip side was he played on impulse. He did not play on the XG or the, ever of that nonsense. And I believe that there's certain people that can take it away from. Like, it's important how a manager then feeds back that information. Whilst I believe that there is, like Laura says, there's a place for it now. We need to accept it. We need to move on. But I also think you can take away the stardom of someone when you start overemphasising that stuff. When he Panenka penaltied that in that cup semi, you can't no stat book is teaching you that. That's magic, that's memories, and for me that's Celtic.
Oh, I love it. Now, we're going to be talking quite a bit about where we are in respect of the communication that has been made to some fans. Some valued fans have had the communication, others have had to read it online. We're going to be talking also about the mass exodus, which is expected, and it's a really good conversation to have, actually, the extent of that exodus and the rebuilding job. Just looking at the personnel, never mind behind the scenes. We're also going to be looking at the situation in and around Eddie Howe, and I've got a wee comparison to make. After the 9 in a row Rangers team were stopped in their tracks by Wim Jansen, what did they do back then in terms of spend? So I'm going to have a wee look at that. It's quite an interesting stat, to be fair, and I don't think we're going to be matching it even 20 odd years later. We're going to have a wee chat about John Sludden, the dearly departed John Sludden, because I do have a fantastic filmed interview with Sluddy, but I wasn't able to get it ready because of the platform we use, the memory in terms of the size of each file, where it can only be 5 minutes. I've got a brilliant video which at some point I will be putting up on the YouTube channel in its entirety when Sluddy spoke to us about his uncle Neely Mockin. I'll also be talking about the roadshow that's going to be happening with Dominic Mackay and Peter Lawwell, and who's it going out to, and are they actually going to be focusing on the most relevant groups, because it sounds to me as if they're going to go through the tried and tested groups that, for me, during this pandemic and during the downfall of Celtic, many of these groups have shown themselves up for being unfit for purpose. The Colts next week, apparently we will know all about the Colts. Is it a Trojan horse to allow the big team to leave the league? That's the question I'm going to be asking. There's a wee conspiracy for everybody. And we'll also be looking at the women's team, and I don't know what the XG expected goal rate was today, Russell, but Celtic are beating Motherwell 2-0 at the moment. This is a very important fixture because we can leapfrog Rangers, who play later on today against Glasgow City, because it's heating up now for not only the league winners but also that second Champions League spot. Are we allowed to talk about the women's today, Russell? Was that been...
I don't care what anyone thinks, mate, about stuff like that. If you're going to get petty about that, you can bowl. We're supporting a team for a start, right, who represent Celtic, and I love that passion. But the flip side is, put all that to one side, we're supporting a team managed by a guy wearing a white blazer with a red t-shirt and trackie.
Can I just say, Russell, following the fine appearance of your own version of that jacket, the ACSOM team did find an Amiga auction which was looking at TV memorabilia, and we have found a white blazer which was used in the Johnny English movie. We're winning the auction as it stands. Our maximum bid is 70 quid. It's currently standing at £35. So there's also
extra small, mate.
Listen, it was because it was worn by a waiter who was quite a dinky wee fella in the movie. You also get a picture. You get a picture of a movie shot of the waiter wearing said jacket, and there's a few other. Listen, I didn't realise until this morning I got a wee update because it ends on Tuesday, and I got a wee update. There's a few other costumes as part of the auction. There's something coming in from Planet of the Apes as well. So I don't know who wants that if we win it, but I am determined to win it because
Russell,
obviously
I think there's an outfit from the Borrowers going as well.
we might have to put it to the old dry cleaners before you wear the jacket.
Russell, I hesitate to nickname you Tattoo from Fantasy Island, but it's out there now. So,
It's all right, mate, it's all right. I prefer Scrappy Doo.
Scrappy too.
Scrappy do, absolutely.
Puppy power.
The Exodus movement of Ja people. There was a bit of wordplay in there, but we decided not to use it at the last minute. There is a lot of interest in Celtic's main assets. I'm not going to go specifically to some of the headlines that we've been seeing, who's interested in who, but there is supposed interest in Chris Ayer, Ryan Christie, Odsonne Edouard. I think Olivier Ncham will have suitors. Some Celtic fans might remember his performances last season and find that hard to believe, but I do think that he is a good calibre of footballer. He does have a lot to offer, but maybe just not at Celtic. He may be flying the nest. Other big name players, I guess, are Albion Ayeti and Vasilis Barkas. So the way I'm looking at that is, over and above that, there's going to be loads of other players leaving. The loanees have already started going back to their parent clubs. First and foremost, Laura, Shane Duffy. Sum up Shane Duffy's Celtic career. He's now way back down to Brighton. He's training with his parent club.
Listen, I want to start by saying I was talking to my brother about this, and we were talking about, imagine for a split second you got the dream move to your boyhood club. You wanted to be a hero in the hoops, and it went how it's went for Shane Duffy. You would be absolutely heartbroken, so I'm sure he is. I think the main problem that I think, having reflected on it, was there's a very different way that you play as a defender if you're playing for, with all due respect, a team like Brighton, who are fighting for the relegation at the bottom of the Premier League, and a team like Celtic, who are probably majority of the time in possession of the ball, attacking, that kind of thing. It requires a different level of concentration from a player at the back, and even in the case where the ball comes towards the defence and you've got to deal with it, the Brighton team, I would imagine in his case, especially if they're playing against some of the bigger teams, are, they're happy for it to go into the stand, they're happy for it to be headed away in any direction. That's not the way that Celtic are expected to play. That's not the way we are expected to play against the calibre of opposition we've got. So there's a double header there where he's been asked to play a slightly different style of football and asked to have a level of concentration that is way above what he probably would have had at any other club. And I think those two things have meant that, on paper or looking at him for Brighton, you think he's this big, as we've called it, no-nonsense defender, but that's not the way that you can play when you're in a Celtic back line, and I think that's where he's maybe struggled. It hasn't worked out. He was never going to stay, but as Jim Orr would say if he was on with me today, we move on.
We move on. A couple of comments coming in. I don't want anybody to think that I'm all about just the free flowing. What's it? Rip roaring, free flowing, never boring Glasgow Celtic. I know that analytics and data is a massive part of football. I just actually don't think that the managerial team or the manager that we had last season embraced it. And I think there was actually a breakdown in terms of maybe what Brendan Rodgers had done previously. And I think the term that was used, or the quote that I didn't credit Tony for when somebody asked me, was that he was an analogue manager in a digital football age, and that was one of Tony's. So some of the comments coming in: Kieran McGugan, Henrik Larsson, even only 20 years ago, played in a totally different era of football. Stats and data analysis is embraced by the best in the game now. You're 100% right on that, Kieran, and I think some of the clubs with maybe even
don't miss the point
with the smaller budgets who focus on it.
Good players get good stats. Good players have good XGs and all that nonsense. Good players will always get good numbers. That's the flip side. Honestly, come on, don't miss the point here.
No, you're right. And by the way, the quote from Ebbe Skovdahl, the late Ebbe Skovdahl, Stevie Ray, that's why he finished bottom of the league with Aberdeen. Absolutely.
Yes.
And I didn't notice again Laura's face, but has been noticed by some of the viewers.
I was just saying, I was bringing it up just to say that that's how some people view stats. We have said on this programme right here now that it's an important part of football.
Sure.
You can't overload footballers with information. It's about how managers disseminate that information to players. It's all down to managers, and they need it, but it's very niche. As Russell says, don't miss the point here. And to go back to your rip-roaring, free-scoring, never boring, I wanted to say I don't own the copyright on that. I'll tell you where that originated. There was a guy called Jim Cullen who ran the Montrose Bar in Glasgow, which was right next to the Daily Record, and a few of the boys, journalist boys, would frequent it every now and again. And that became my, like cheers when Norm walked in and everybody shouted Norm. He would shout to me, Tony, what's the news with the rip-roaring, free-scoring, never-boring Glasgow Celtic? And it was every time, and it always made me laugh, and it stuck in my head, because I still remember it. And he was a larger-than-life guy, Jim Cullen, great guy. His patter was brilliant. I thought he was one of the funniest guys ever, and every time I walked in, that's what he would shout. Tony, what's the news or the story with the rip-roaring, free-scoring, never-boring Glasgow Celtic? And so people are saying get it on t-shirts and stuff, so I hope Jim's watching, or if someone can get a message to him, just tell him it struck a chord with me, and that's why I brought it up.
And the royalties will be on their way to the Montrose Bar if it's still there.
But there's people hashtagging and all that in DMs, the rip-roaring, free-scoring, never boring, and it's hilarious. Great. I still find it funny to this day.
It paints a great picture. Now Studio O'Reilly comes in to say, has Tony got a new camera? Loving it. Well, Tony's actually been in the studio over the last week a couple of times. Tony, fill the viewers in with who we spoke to the other day, because this really is a retro look back that might go over Russell and Laura's head, I'm not sure. Back to the kind of 80s, the 70s, the 90s, and what it was like being a football fan as a kid back then.
We spoke to none other than Barry Tomlinson, who was the editor of the Roy the Rovers comic. And it was half an hour of absolute bliss on Friday, just reminiscing about myself and Paul John and probably many viewers and listeners times reading the Roy the Rovers comic. And it was tremendous, wasn't it? It was told us a lot of stuff, and that's a podcast that we pre-recorded it, which will be out sometime
this week.
Yeah,
sometime. Russell, listen, Roy the Rovers, it really just shows you the generational gap. Because, I mean, Tony, I think, stopped buying it in 86. I started buying it in 87. He was passing the baton. There you go. He was passing the baton over.
There you go.
This was a kind of era, though, that kids would buy, maybe a wee bit younger than that, would buy the Beano and the Dandy, and at Christmas time you'd get Oor Willie and the Bruins. So comic strips were a thing. You know, you would buy comics back then. Not just as a kid. I mean, their kind of target group, I think, was 8 to 15. Now, what 15-year-olds reading? You know, it's incredible. So, Roy the Rovers,
they're all reading stats, Paul. They're all reading stats.
The catastrophication of a generation.
But you don't get stats. You don't get stats comics, do you, Laura? I don't know. Maybe you do. I'm not sure.
Barry was a gentleman, and we waxed lyrical about the good old days of Hot Shot Hamish, Roy the Rovers, and all of that stuff. There's a great picture, actually, Charlie Nicholas standing next to Roy Race, who was obviously a cardboard cutout, and Charlie had the Arsenal top and a pair of white jeans. So the only thing missing there, Russell, was the white blazer to go over the Arsenal top.
You know, and I think Charlie said Roy Race wasn't a legend as well, by the way. Do you know what I mean?
Did he?
I think he got that in. Yeah, he's not a real legend.
Roy Race won 3 European Cups, mate. 9 league titles, 8 FA Cups.
I don't. But we're singing to the same spreadsheet, we'll be all right.
Well, I don't know what the XGs are for a fictitious cardboard football player.
As long as we're singing from the same spreadsheet. I didn't miss that, mate. Well, that was good.
That's Sepp Blatter. It is indeed. You're right.
Now, so Shane Duffy, you're absolutely right. And I think it's also important to state, Laura, that, it is one of these things whereby when he came to the club, we were crying out, on ACSOM, we were crying out to bring somebody in who we thought was of that ilk, and Shane Duffy. And, you know, the podcasts are out there for anybody to look back on and mock us, because we were talking about it being a great transfer window at the time. And we can't change that. That's what we said. And obviously, it's great now with hindsight to look back and say we got it completely wrong.
But what he went through, though, Paul, I mean, in fairness, is completely different. I mean, he lost a parent, did he not? Am I right in saying that? It was something like that? There was something.
He lost his dad. Yes.
Yeah, he lost his dad. You know, you know, let's be serious here. Do you know what I mean? That rocks people. This guy's in his 20s. In his 20s. Don't forget it. You look at him and you go, Island Cat. I think people think footballers sometimes are veterans of life, you know. He's still a guy in his 20s learning his way. You lose your dad. You might sign for the biggest club in the world. You lose your dad. I lost my dad when I was 21. I can relate to it to a point, but I never had to play for Celtic throughout that. Do you know what I mean? I just had to get by day to day. Yep. He came in, you know, I think that gets taken away a lot. I remember the same thing with Scott Brown. Like, he went through years ago, written off, all that nonsense. Folk forget to take in what's going on day to day with these people's lives. You know, you don't have the pressure of playing for Celtic on top of that. I think Shane Duffy will go on and have a good career still. I believe that.
I hope he does.
There's no manual or spreadsheet for personal loss when you're a footballer. So you deal with it the way you see fit. And I think that's you know, that is a byproduct of Shane Duffy's career or season at Celtic, you know, which cannot be overlooked, because he did have to deal with the biggest personal tragedy in his life so far, probably. So, you know, when it comes to analysing it, then I think there's a degree of slack that has to be cut, and not just the personal tragedy, some of the abuse that he also suffered online. I think you have to take that into consideration as well. You know, this guy's come up from Brighton and maybe not experienced that level of scrutiny either in his life or his private life, and not just on football matters, but matters relating to his father passing away. And it takes a special kind of person to actually deal with that. So I think
to do it simultaneously, Tony, would be ridiculous when you look back.
Yeah,
you know, look at it, you go, it would be so outrageous.
And I think Shane Duffy himself see that the Celtic season probably a blip in his career, because he's a far better player than this season at Celtic will have shown, and hopefully he recovers from personal loss in some shape or form, and then he gets his career kick-started again. And who knows, in the future he might come back at some stage, you know, maybe have some unfinished business at Celtic, because because of the way he feels about the club. But I think everybody, as a Celtic family, will wish him all the best, and hopefully he can become the player he wants to be and get back to the form that he showed that made Celtic so interesting in the first place.
100%, agree with that. Well said. Good words from Russell as well. Tony, I don't know what you've started here, but we're getting a lot of Roy the Rovers comments coming in. Caplo Mark, Roy Race, Duncan Gray, Paco Diaz.
Paco Diaz, aye.
And Martin Bickett reckons we need Rick Stewart as our own goalkeeper. The way that we spoke to Barry, last word on the matter, he speaks about Roy Race as if he was a real person. He actually speaks about him as if he was a human being that he knew. I mean, he edited the comic for 30 years. And I actually asked him the question, you know, was there ever an opportunity to turn it into a film? You thought it was so popular at the time. They were selling 300,000 comics a week, Russell, in its heyday. 300,000 a week. And he says there was a few discussions that just never happened, because I always thought Sean Bean would have made a good Roy Race.
Good, I like it. I like that. It's mad though, isn't it? Because it's your imagination just like taking over, and nowadays there's just, as we've been speaking about all day, there's too many stats to prove that Roy the Rovers doesn't exist. Really, if you look on Wikipedia, it doesn't actually exist. He's not real. All right,
that's a shame.
You know,
it's a shame.
You used to be able to dream.
There's an innocence, Russell. There's an innocence that's been lost.
Hang on, can I just pull this conversation back? We're getting a bit too Kevin Graham here. We're getting a bit too on the DeLorean.
You cannot get too Kevin Graham, Laura. There's no such thing as too Kevin Graham.
Tony has brought in...
This here is a 40-year-old magazine. This is the original one of the original copies when
Look
Roy
at the
Race
storyline,
got
Russell.
shot.
Oh,
It's
Roy Race-
iconic.
Roy Race
that
shot.
blood trickling down the letters, right? And 5 people were in the frame for shooting him. And to this day, and I named them all to Barry on Friday because I still remember who they were. And it turned out it was a boy called Elton Blake, who was a TV actor. And he blamed Roy Race for not landing the part of playing Roy Race in a big TV production.
Brilliant, mate. The tension. See the tension that created is for a 9-year-old.
And for our generation, it was Who Shot JR for kids, because the year before, JR got shot in Dallas, which was a big, massive American soap, guy played by Larry Hagman. And Russell and I, Paul, John and I were listening to a pod before it, and I said to Paul, it was our JR moment, and Barry Tomlinson admitted that they stole the idea from Who Shot JR in Dallas, and they wanted to do a big whodunit with Roy Race.
Well, see, when Russell and I were kids, there was 2. There was Who Shot Mr. Burns in The Simpsons.
Yep.
And there was who Shot Phil Mitchell in EastEnders.
Well, there you go, Laura. It's the exact same thing.
Yep.
So they
they were inspired by Roy the Rovers, Laura. When everybody goes back, it is. That's another show entirely. I'm loving it when a plan comes together. But we're talking about players going back to their parent clubs. Certain players will be leaving. And I had a wee look at the squad. There was an in-depth look at this with Colin Watt a few weeks back. And I sent this in a WhatsApp group. Some people responded to it because they were shocked at the nature of where we are. Now, I wrote 2 potential lineups. And by the way, there's a couple of players in here that might also be leaving once everybody leaves the club that we're expecting to leave. And the first one was Bain, Ralston, Taylor, Welsh, Hendry, Forrest, Sorrow, McGregor, Johnson, Turnbull, and Ayeti, ? And the second one, so the second choice players would be Hazard, O'Connor, Bolingoli, Hjeld, Beaton, Sved, Connell, Luca Connell, who's playing at Queen's Park, Henderson, Shaw, who's coming in from Sheffield Wednesday, Rogic, because he wouldn't get a game ahead of Turnbull, and Bayo. And I've got a question mark beside Rogic as well, because there's no guarantee that players who have been on the fringes will start or be first picks for Celtic. That shows you, I think, Russell, the scale of the rebuild. If that's your first and our second choice, once all the players that we expect to leave the building. And the point was made last week again by Colin, I've got to say, whoever comes in can't buy an entire new team. You can't buy it. Who from all the names I've mentioned there would be first picks, do you think? I mean, I was looking at it. Maybe Taylor, perhaps, Forrest, Sorrow, McGregor, and Turnbull. There's 5. Am I being too harsh? So,
no, I don't think you're being harsh in the slightest. I really don't. I think it's one of those things as well where it's easy to go, let's just tell the truth here. A guy plays 5 games good for Hibs, and we do rate them straight away. A guy plays, like Laura mentioned James Forrest, we brother on Friday. He's played probably 2 seasons well for Livingston. We wouldn't take him seriously as a signing. We wouldn't. The fans wouldn't accept it. 10 good games. Hibs are like the fashionable club to buy from. But the flip side is, I can't deny I would also take all the players that are on offer from there that we've discussed. Your Doigs, your Boyles, you would. And Nisbet up front, fantastic. But the other side is, how are they producing players or signing guys for 50 grand from the lower leagues and Celtic aren't? Where is Celtic's youth system coming through? When you look back, some of the mainstays, that 9-in-a-row team that you look back on, and it's the 9-in-a-row team now, which breaks my heart even saying it, but it is now the 9-in-a-row Mark II team side. Kieran Tierney sticks out from that like a sore thumb as the man. Callum McGregor, the man. James Forrest, probably the most derided man that really, when you look back at, was one of the, he was the man as well. You look at these guys then, they've all came through the ranks. Now, we've got to have more faith in what we're producing. We have to. We simply have to. Otherwise, our methods are completely flawed. Now, for all the rant and raving we do about Brendan Rodgers and the projects that he builds, I then can't believe guys like Oakleflex, who he attracted to Celtic because he was Brendan Rodgers, aren't yet good enough for that first team, or at least worth I don't know, they're 15 minutes here and there. You look at what John Kennedy's method, and Lennon will crack me up forevermore because he has stuck. Honestly, I can't believe how backwards he's been as a manager. I'm actually a bit disappointed in him for all his forward thinking, for all his forward talking, for all his, contemporary manager sort of patter. Karamoka Dembele is rated as one of the best young players in Europe, like he was 2 years ago. He's 17 right now and verge of becoming an Islam Ferus. That's the reality of where Celtic's got to. You look at Okoflex, he left Arsenal, I think it was, to join Celtic because of a project, because of a vision. We're going to lose all of this. We're going to lose it all unless we buck up our ideas and get a manager who believes in that sort of thing again. So, yes, the squad you're looking at, Paul, you're spot on. But I think there's stuff there that if there was still a Brendan Rodgers or, let's say, an Eddie Howe in charge that goes, do you know what? He's good. He's good. I can make him good. Like a Luke O'Connell, maybe, Paul. You never know. Even those sort of guys might get in the midfield one day.
Controversial.
You need a manager with a vision and with ability to bring out the best in the youth. And we've lacked that the last 2 years. There's just no two ways.
I'm going to come to yourself, Laura, because I agree with Russell. I think that we need to do better with the players coming through. I think we've probably lost a hell of a lot of talent over the last 3 or 4 years because our focus was just on, it was results driven. It always has to be results driven, but that doesn't, for me, take away the fact that when it comes to a situation where you've got to throw Stephen Welsh in against Rangers this season, he's only played one first team game at that stage. That's not good enough, because Welsh are dominating the domestic game. There are many, many opportunities throughout the season to give a player like Welsh a game. And this is where we really have neglected the youth side of things. The signing side of things, I think we've criticised it not just this season but previously as well. That policy has to improve. We've spoken this week around some of the talent in the Scottish game that would improve our side, and it's time for us to stop turning our nose up at that. I mean, I've used the example, and people, and I don't mean we should have signed them, but I remember when London Dykes, the namesake, Dykesy as I call him, was available for just under £2 million. Now, he's gone down to QPR this season, and he's performed well for Scotland as well. I know he's not the type of player that Eduard is. He's completely different. 42 appearances, 12 goals, 5 assists for QPR under Mark Warburton. He's playing alongside Stefan Johansson. Would he have been any worse than Bio? Because, I mean, you're talking about the same price range of a player. But we go for Bio because, that's our signing policy. We try and pick a player from any part of the world. We bring him in overseas and almost mask the fact that we don't know a great deal about him. We've done the same with Klimala, £3.5 million coming in for Polish football. Would they have done any worse than Klimala? Would Dykes have done any worse than Bio? And I'm not saying that, I regret not signing him. I'm just using it as an example of looking at the Scottish market as well, Laura. Is it time for us to really look at some of the players Russell's mentioned? And, it's not a case of us just cherry picking them all, because, the club at Hibs in this case have already had offers in January and knocked them back from English clubs for the likes of Porteous and Nisbet. I mean, we could be in a situation where the minute a Sunderland or any of that ilk are interested in a player, we're going to get knocked right out of the ballpark when it comes to fees and wages.
Why?
Well, I think that's true, but there's a bit of an inconsistency when people make this argument about, look how well Lyndon Dykes is doing, look how well Ivan Toney's doing, look how... My problem is more the fact, would Ivan Toney, there's talk about him going for between 30 and 40 million because of the season he's had. Would Ivan Toney be worth that if he had come to Celtic when he was in Glasgow last summer? Or would he have become a victim of what is apparently a very poorly run club at the moment, and therefore not shown what he has shown this season elsewhere? So I struggle sometimes when people say, oh, look who we were close to getting and look how well they've done elsewhere, because I don't think we can guarantee that they would have done as well coming to us in the first place. I don't see any reason not to look at the Scottish game, because I think there's plenty of young players there that are as good as anything you'll find elsewhere, and we can certainly get them cheaper, as you said, when a team in sometimes even League 1 or 2 are able to match or exceed our wages. But I think we do need to have a closer look at what happens to the players that come into the club, because I don't think there's a guarantee at the moment that we buy a fantastic player and they go on to be a fantastic player for us, because there's obviously problems with the coaching and the infrastructure that have caused a lot of much better players to come into the club, and we've talked about how their level have dropped not long after they've come in. So so there's a bit of a 50-50 there for me, that I don't necessarily look with nostalgia on what could have been with a player. I'm more concerned about what's happened to the players that come in and why have they not lived up to their potential.
No one's looking nostalgically though. Really, at players. I mean, the Ivan Toney thing is the nostalgia. I suppose I agree with you, but I would guarantee you he would do better than Albion. I would give you that guarantee right now. There is no two ways. It has been a disaster, that guy, for £5 million.
To go back
he would do better.
To go back to that dreaded word, look at Ivan Toney's stats.
Oh!
Goal scoring.
He would,
right.
Come on.
He's a goal scorer. He would have scored goals for Celtic, even despite the fact that they were poor. If you feed the goat and they will score, as they say. So
listen, I'm just using Ivan Toney as an example.
No, I'm not having a go at you, Laura, either. I'm just sort of saying that I think one thing you could guarantee with Ivan Toney is goals in a good team or a poor team, because it's what he brings to the table. It's his specialist skill set, to use those kind of phrases, you know. So
I actually agree with you, Laura, but
I agree with you too.
We're talking about this summer going forward, not nostalgia signings. I promise you. I agree with you. Sometimes you look at shoulda, woulda, couldas, and I agree with you. What's the point? It's not happening. But
you had
are potential signings.
You had the chance to shell out $5 million in Toney, and you shelled out $5 million in Ajeti. It's no hindsight. It's just factual. You're looking at two players and you're thinking, and it's not a tinge of nostalgia. You're just looking at facts. One has outperformed the other, and bearing in mind he's playing for Brentford.
The best
he
example.
Hasn't gone to a fashionable club. He's gone to an unfashionable club and he's scored over 30 goals. Is that right?
The best example I can give to you, Laura, in your defence on this one is I remember speaking to Ken Dalglish. I don't know if anybody's got like a kind of book running on when I'm going to name drop somebody that I've spoken to, but Dalglish on the 42nd minute
Bob Marley
wins a sweepstake. Yeah. Bob Marley. That was his son I spoke to remotely. And I did say that to him because obviously Graham Souness had been in at Celtic training around about the time of the Quality Street Kids Tuesday, Thursday nights up at Celtic Park, up at Barrowfield actually. And me just naively saying to him what a signing that would have been. And Dalglish says, yeah, but you're thinking of the Graham Souness that played for Liverpool. And to get to that stage, he had to have quite a few disappointments in his football career. He had to go down to Tottenham Hotspurs, and for that not to work, Laura, then go away and make a name for himself and resurrect his career really at Middlesbrough. And he always speaks about Bobby Murdoch being a huge influence in that. So you're absolutely spot on in what you say. It's not the Toney, although I take what Russell's saying into account, the Toney, what he's done elsewhere wouldn't exactly replicate it at Celtic Park because it was a really difficult season.
This Toney will sign for Celtic if you want.
Sorry? Aye, Toney,
This Toney will sign for Celtic.
What's the space? What's the space, Tony? But yeah,
two splicers and a
specifically replicate the form that you found elsewhere, because the situation at Celtic this season, it would have been difficult for anybody to kind of perform.
Yeah, like I saw an interview with Riyad Mahrez last week saying St Mirren rejected him, and everybody's going, "Oh, imagine if St Mirren had Riyad Mahrez." Well, maybe if St Mirren had Riyad Mahrez, he wouldn't have won the league with Leicester, and he wouldn't have gone on to be starring in a Champions League final with Man City. It's all these sliding doors moments. It's the same with when you hear people talking about Ronaldinho and Zidane nearly signed for Blackburn Rovers. Well, maybe if they did, they wouldn't be Ronaldinho and Zidane. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's an argument and a line of thought that I don't always follow in that sense.
Here's one
I would like to ask Mahrez if he regrets missing out on a Renfrewshire Cup winners medal.
I'm sure he would, but here's one for you. You mentioned, the mention of Ronaldinho always brings this to my mind, Laura, but Celtic sent people on a scouting mission over to Brazil to watch Grêmio in the late 90s, and at that time there was a young Ronaldinho tearing it up, and we brought home Raphael Scheidt for £5 million. So, you know, we could have got Ronaldinho, and actually he was offered to St Mirren as well on trial.
Yeah, he was.
So whoever that scout was.
Mahrez did play for St Mirren. He was there for 2 or 3 months on loan. Mental.
Incredible.
What a grounding.
Absolutely, what a grounding. So, if we go back to the time where a 10 was stopped in Scottish football, previous to this season, what happened at Ibrox is that they went and appointed Dick Advocaat. And I'm just using this as a comparison, not so that I can talk about Rangers. And Dick Advocaat rebuilt the team. Don't know whose money was used, but he rebuilt the team with £35 million of an investment. As I say, I'm not sure where that money came from. In today's money, Russell, it's £54 million. So in order to prize that championship back from Celtic, they pumped into the team £35 million, equivalent to £54 million in today's money. We're not going to be in that position, Laura. This is the biggie, and I think this is why the point Colin makes is a very good point, in that the manager that comes in has to have a bit of the O'Neill about him in terms of, and Rodgers, rejuvenating players that are already at the club.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of players there that are certainly playing below what they could be playing at if they had the motivation, if they had the guidance that they could have. Look at Callum McGregor. I think he's certainly suffering from, as he's outrightly said in various points, suffering from not getting the right coaching. And so there are certainly players there who could be better players than they are currently if they were getting the right guidance. And doing that, getting that right guidance for those players would mean that the signings that you make are more likely to succeed when they come in as well, because they would be getting better guidance along with them.
But it's still the most important signing of the close season, the manager.
Yeah.
A good manager or a great manager or a high bar manager will get the best in what's already there, and a good manager, a great manager, a high bar manager will bring in good players. That's the signing policy. There's only one signing policy. You sign good footballers, right? That's what happens. Celtic have signed too many poor footballers. Now, you have to start signing good and better footballers. It's no hard. And if these guys are, dedicated to their craft, then they'll know they're good footballers, like you and I can identify good footballers. Not saying it's as easy as that, but it's certainly not as hard as Celtic have made it in the past few years by signing projects and signing poor footballers who don't cut the mustard. Sign good footballers, and then you can start to move forward.
Yeah.
Tony, would you agree though? Would you agree that there's 100% a difference between just would you agree that though, you need to have a mindset as well, a Celtic state of mind, if you will. You need to have a wee bit of that. Yeah. I think there's a lot of good footballers we've signed that look at Juninho. The guy's won a World Cup. It doesn't work. Yeah. You need to have something has to change, and desire to play for the football club for the first place, I think, has been.
But I said a good manager will bring all these people with him if you're going to sign players. Right, that's what I'm talking about. I'm
on your side,
Tony, you're
good footballers though isn't enough. We need them to.
How's it not enough? How's it not enough? You can't get enough good footballers in your team. It's about how they're coached.
But
and as I said, the most important signing of this close season is going to be the manager. So if it's Eddie Howe, I would put my trust in Eddie Howe to bring in good footballers, make them better, and the team will improve. That's what I'm talking about, right? But the mentality will be there. It will be there.
To me, that's two different arguments, though, because you're saying don't sign poor footballers. Maybe Patrick Klimala wasn't a poor footballer. Maybe Ajeti wasn't a poor footballer. They've come into a club where they aren't getting managed. And so if you get the manager, you can make players that might appear currently to be poor footballers better.
What have I just said? That's what I've just said. You can make good players better.
Do you think
the ones that are there? That's what I've just said.
Do you think, Tony, that this comes in from John McKay, or MCA, coming in via YouTube? Thanks for joining us, John. John thinks that a Yeti under a new manager romps the league. So I think that's one player that I've got on this list with a question mark.
Go on.
You know, I agree with you, Russell. I think that it's just not happened, and it's going to take a massive turnaround. Do you think a player like that, and a few others, I think McGregor needs a new lease of life. Hopefully it's at Celtic Park, not elsewhere, and I hope he gets that with a manager. Do you think he'll be able to save the career of someone like Albion Ayeti at Celtic, or is that
Jim Orr
is he gone?
Jim Orr was saying he was at the walking football. He was back and he was loving it. And I said I'm surprised that Ayeti wasn't there beside him. Do you know what I mean? Going head tip, because that to me is a walking footballer. It's done.
I think you're being a bit Rodney Marsh there on him, to be fair. You know what I mean?
I want to give Ayeti every chance. But at the end of the day, see, when you're talking about match fitness, and then me and Paul John Dykes had this discussion in October last year in the Fabled studio, you know? And it was October, we had a debate about match fitness. What does it mean? How do you, what does it even mean anymore? How do you get match fit if you don't play games? How can you only train so much and then get told that you're not match fit because you've not played matches? Where does this all balance out? How does it even out? For me, Ayeti, whilst a good goal record the first 6 or 7 games, let's be honest, not one of you think he's looked up to scratch when he's came on. He's not looked sharp. That's the word. Sharp.
No, he's not looked sharp.
He's had a full season. I'm sorry.
No value for money for your £5 million. Let's put it that way.
Where's his hunger to get that sharpness, though, Tony, mate?
No, you're right. Going in and doing extra sessions.
And so a good manager might instill that into him. That's what I'm talking about as well. You know?
Now, the Celtic women are 3-0 up. Just a wee goal flash for you there. The Celtic women's team are 3-0 up. We are going to be second in the league after this result, and then Rangers play Glasgow City.
We are Champions League.
That would be amazing next season. Here's the thing. Somebody popped up there saying along the lines of the Raphael Scheidt Ronaldinho parallel universe that I brought up earlier, Laura, that Celtic went to watch Pierce O'Leary playing for Vancouver Whitecaps, and there was a wee guy called Peter Beardsley playing for Vancouver Whitecaps, and we overlooked him and brought in David's younger brother Pierce, who played a few games for Celtic, but I don't think he was any Beardsley, was he really, Tony?
Are you asking Laura or me?
I'm asking you, Tony.
Pierce O'Leary was certainly not a Peter Beardsley.
Peter Beardsley.
When I just think of Pierce O'Leary, I think of a penalty over the bar at Easter Road.
Yes.
In a shootout.
Yep.
Which Celtic lost. So
they did.
That's, you know how certain players are synonymous with certain things. Like Willie Garner synonymous with OGs, Jim Melrose, Vicky to the supporters, Pierce O'Leary, penalty over the bar in a League Cup tie. After a brilliant, I think it was 4 each it finished.
That's right, aye. And
Easter Road.
Was that a replay as well, I think? And that's why it's gone to penalties. Yeah.
Big Piercy, sorry.
Would have taken Beardsley.
And certainly not a Beardsley, yes.
Not a Beardsley. I'm going to come into the next section, and I'm going to come to yourself first, Laura. Celtic's latest communication with the fan base. Some valued fans got the communications whilst others didn't. Some season ticket holders didn't get it, and some non-season ticket holders did. Yeah. Who did and who didn't, who knows. Is this the way for the club to communicate, and what did the statement / communication actually say?
Well, I didn't get it. My mum did. I don't know what the difference is between us because neither of us are current season ticket holders, but she forwarded it on to me to let me have a look at it. And I was making a few notes on it, and I just thought, like in summary, what it said to me was, we've heard you, pipe down. That was like a long way of saying that, but there was a couple of interesting comments that were like, we're not able to make regular public comment on the matter of appointing a manager. Okay, You're not allowed to make regular public comment. Some public comment would help, but okay, that's fine. We plan to have met with all our main supporters groups by next week. What are your main supporters groups? Are you talking about season ticket holders only? Are you talking about supporters clubs? Are you talking about the only supporters that you appear to have provided any extra value to this season, which is the people paying the most expensive season tickets who are getting hampers and getting audiences with players and whatever. The other one was, our aim as always is to give the supporters something they can be proud of based on the great Celtic values. They haven't done anything to reflect the great Celtic values this season, I don't think. And I've said previously, the whole Celtic values thing is something that I do pride myself on, or do pride myself as being a Celtic supporter on. But I don't necessarily think it's the club's job to do that. We have the Celtic Foundation who can do that. Don't pretend that you're still like upholding those values and adhering to those values when your actions don't reflect it. And then the last point that I saw was bringing up season tickets. You're going to be getting these out soon, blah, blah, blah. To me, that kind of summed up the whole statement as, and I say this as somebody who isn't a season ticket holder, but who sympathises with the season ticket holders in this case. It sounded to me that the fact that they were saying, oh, by the way, we are going to tell you about season tickets soon, it's as if they've said, listen, you're not getting any more information before the season tickets come out. You're not getting any more communication before the season tickets come out. And by the way, we know that you have plans to make and blah, blah, blah. They're acting as if the season ticket holders have got 600 quid just to drop within a matter of weeks to renew their season ticket. And that's just not the case. If they were following the Celtic values that you talk about, they would know that that's not the case for a lot of the supporters. But I just thought it was a very long-winded, kind of extravagant way of saying not very much.
My kind of view on the communique, because I agree with you, is that for me, they were focusing on we are not able to make regular public comments on this matter. And what they're referring to is the specific matter of the manager. Mm-hmm. But I don't think all season that's what the Celtic supporters, and certainly on a Celtic State of Mind, that's not what we've been asking for. We've been asking for regular engagement, regular communications, not specifically just the manager. Yeah, that has obviously been over the last 70 days, something that's been in focus. But I hope they're not missing the point here in terms of why we are constantly going on about the lack of engagement. It isn't just because of the manager. It's just the communication this season has been absolutely dreadful from the club. And actually, I would include that statement in it. I don't think it's got any better. As I say, I mean, the consistency, who got it, who didn't, who's in, who isn't, was it meant to just be season ticket holders? Because if it was, then you're going to have a look at your mailing system that you've got. Was it sent to people because they had bought online tickets or something from the shop at some point? Who knows? But in relation to the communication, I think that there's a wee oversight there. But I agree also, Laura, with regards to the main supporter groups, because I feel that some supporter groups that have been in and around the club for many, many years, decades, generations, have been silent all season. And so why are they going to get an audience with Dominic Mackay and Peter Lawwell? Why not come to a platform such as, and I'm going to use it as a shameless plug, like this one, and speak to a vastly greater audience than the people who obviously haven't stood up to the club all season because they don't want to upset anyone, because once everybody gets back, they want to have the free seats in the boardroom. So for me, it's not the way to go. I am not impressed with the fact that, and it's not just me throwing the toys at the pram, because ACSOM haven't been invited to any of these clandestine meetings, but I think that you're out of touch, guys, if that's what you think the way to go is. Russell, what's your thoughts?
I felt with the email, I got the email. Let's just come clean. I've never won the Celtic season ticket in my life. I've worked Saturdays my whole adulthood. So put watching right now. If I've spoiled your myth, I don't care. I've never had one, right? I've been to as many Celtic games as I could growing up. I loved it. Always have loved it. But the fact of the matter is, what got in the way? I own my own pub. You know what I mean? Saturdays are important. That's it. I work for a company right now where Saturdays are part of my rota, so I won't be buying one next season either. I got the email. The thing I thought with the email, though, and the important side of it, is I don't think it mattered what they wrote unless they were appointing the manager. We were all going to slate them for it anyway, and I do feel there's an impasse here where the club's created this, by the way. That's the problem now. And you can almost, it's got to a stage, you can almost now see it from the club's point of view. You can almost go, do you know what? Whatever you post, we're going to hammer you now. You know what I mean? We are coming for you with knives, unless it's appointing the manager. But if you go a wee bit further back, you go, this actually still is a club-created thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was there, like, you created the distance, and now I do accept that it's going to get petty. and it doesn't matter what you say. We're going to go, you know, all they said was, we're looking at a manager, so we're going to, like, still hate you. Like, I get all that nonsense. The flip side is, it's been 80 days. And the flip side is, it had been 3 months before you sacked Lennon that we'd all been asking for some sort of communication. There were sharks outside the ground, you know? All this nonsense has been created by Celtic. But I do have to accept that if you take all that away, I don't know what people expected from the email if they went to appoint a manager. What did you want them to say? There is nothing to say at the end of the day. Like, it was always a hiding to nothing to me.
What I took from that is I want to see Laura wear a t-shirt. I've heard you, pipe down. that should be Laura's personal motto.
I know.
Because nobody's going to mess with you, Laura, when you're in that mood. You know what I mean? In that mode. It's brilliant. I love it. It's great. And I agree with what you said completely. But yeah, that's your motto now. I've heard you, pipe down.
No, but I mean, I like that. I would come on here and say if I thought there was anything of substance in there that they communicated to us that we didn't know previously. Everybody knows that Dom Mackay's in the middle of a handover period. They didn't spell that out for us. Everybody knows that the reason they've not announced a manager is because they're trying to give us the highest quality manager that they can. This is all stuff that we know. Like Russell says, anything that you told us that wasn't, here's our new manager, is pretty pointless at the moment.
It is, and by the way, that's a quick hour. But before we go, a couple of wee things to update you on. First and foremost, Celtic are still winning 3-0 against Motherwell. We're 65 minutes in. Tegan Bowie's just came on. She's another player I rate highly, having started watching the Celtic women's team, Russell, because I support Celtic. So it could be the women's team, it could be the first team, and it could be the Colts team next season, hopefully.
Celtic, Paul, you know.
That's it, exactly. The green and white hoops, I'll be watching them. But the other thing I wanted to mention is a week ago, I think it was, I did ask everybody to keep John Slodden in their thoughts and their prayers because he was fighting a very difficult battle. Unfortunately, he lost that battle. You will have seen some of the messages coming through on Twitter, and he's one of the guys, and I don't mean to sound cliched, but you know, everybody loved John Slodden. Everybody loved Sluddy. Anyone that came into contact with him, you know, and he spoke brilliantly about the likes of Tommy Burns, who was a good pal of his. His uncle Neely Mockin, he was just steeped in Celtic traditions. He's one of these guys that you know, had things gone a wee bit different in his own career, he might have played more than the one game that he did play for the first team in the Glasgow Cup. Tony Haggerty, you were looking at that and his incredible performance for the Scottish schoolboys back in 1980, where he scored 2 in the 5-4 game as well. Yeah,
and I'd said it on Friday, and I said to Laura as well, just go onto YouTube and watch that England-Scotland schoolboys game from 1980, 5-4 to Scotland, Sluddy getting 2, in front of 70,000 at Wembley, Brian Moore commentating, Serene, Ian St John summarising. It's just a snapshot of time, but it's fantastic, and yeah, and that's a fitting tribute if you want to remember John Sludden as a footballer, but I remember him as a person as well. I shared the press box with him on many occasions, and echo what you said there, Paul. You couldn't not love him. He was a lovely guy, very humble, and very kind, and a decent fella. So my thoughts and condolences to the family.
Absolutely, to the Sluddens and the Mockins and everybody else who knew and loved John Sludden. And you know, when I hear stories like that, I think back to the time he came through to speak to a Celtic state of mind. I retweeted that the other day there. Anybody who wants to catch up with John Sludden's football career, give it a listen. It's fascinating. You know, I asked him, he was Islam Farouzi's coach at Celtic, John Sludden, and he spoke about his disappointment as to how Islam's career worked out. And I did ask him who was the most promising player he worked with when he was coaching up at Lennoxtown. You know what he said? Simon Ferry. Cy Ferry, because I think Simon Ferry had some really, really bad injuries at a young age, and that curtailed his career somewhat. But also, Sluddy was a big friend of Brian McLaughlin, the original super who played with Celtic, made his debut at 16 as well, and they moved into the junior game together. So, All the best to everybody that knew and loved John Sludden. And that is the end for a Sunday bulletin, where we threw quite a lot into the mix today. We don't always agree, but that's what it's all about. Thank you to Tony Haggerty, Russell Boyce and Laura Bradburn. And thanks for all the commenters, everybody that's getting involved in the social media, for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind.
Thank you.